On this episode of The Eternities, the science fiction writer and author of a book on 9/11, Roberto Quaglia.
Well, who these powerful groups are is quite difficult to define because we live in a kind of cryptocracy. So basically, this is it's not a democracy, maybe it's an oligarchy, but the real point is a cryptocracy. You don't know who they are because they are clever enough to disguise themselves. Because if you are this guy, if you look at the history of the world, everybody who has had the power at some point has lost his head and was executed. The more powerful they were, the more tragic was their fall when finally the power finished.
Roberto Quaglia is a writer whose body of work includes science fiction, surrealistic fiction, plays, screenplays, humour and essays. In the years following September 11, he felt impelled to write about the event. He describes the book as being about the myth of September 11, about the smokescreens of the war of perception and the psychology and insanity connected with this. To expose this myth completely is a modern blasphemy, an unbearable heresy. It's the satanic verses of Western democracy. Critics of such heretics as Roberto will often irascibly ask, is everything a conspiracy? I started the interview by putting this question to Roberto.
Well, we should first define the word conspiracy and then understand which kind of conspiracy. Because the expression conspiracy theory was actually first, I don't think invented, but for sure promoted at the time of the murder of President Kennedy in the USA. In this case, everybody who actually would question the official version, which was not very credible of the events, would be labeled as a conspiracy theorist. And this label, which was anyway not so popular, has then become particularly actual and popular after September 11. And now actually it has grown up to create a big schism between people who think that everything is a conspiracy and people who think that nothing is a conspiracy. But then again, we should define what a conspiracy is. And regarding this matter, we can go back to the big story, the 9/11 story, and actually the official narrative of the facts which happened on that day is that 19 Arab hijackers has conspired inside a cave in Afghanistan together with Obama to attack the USA, hijacking the planes. But actually, this is a conspiracy. So basically, the official narrative of the facts of 9/11, it is a conspiracy theory in all its aspects. And actually, it is a conspiracy theory more than the conspiracy theories who actually say that the government has orchestrated the facts. Because when a government does something, it is not a conspiracy. It is its policy. It is a military operation. It is a black operation. It's not a conspiracy. So we should really define the terms very well. However, now we have the concept of conspiracy, which means something different. It means like, is there something hidden behind? So what we see, what really what a real is. So basically, it refers. Do we live in a book in a reality which is like it seems, or we live in a sort of Philip K. Dick reality where actually everything is completely different?
But the common understanding of the term now in Western society is it's people that are questioning, our high-level democratic societies with all its checks and balances, and its media for all its faults. The media, is perceived to, ferret out all the information and present the view, pretty thorough view of reality and how things are run in politics and how things go on. And yet, there are these people who have the arrogance to question our advanced societies, institutions, and say, no, it's not that way. I have another view, and that's what we understand by conspiracy, isn't it? And
I completely agree. The meaning has completely changed, but it's very. By the fact that we label the people who actually question the state of reality, the state of information, like conspiracy, it's a way of undermine them. So therefore, even though I use these terms because it has become common language, I try, to fight against the use of these words because they are words of newspeaks, like Orwellian newspeak, words meant in a way to undermine immediately the category. So politically correct, in this case, we should be use politically correctness in our favor and just refuse to be labeled like that.
What do you think about the idea, now that you've mentioned, I want us to get onto it later, but of PC, political correctness, being a conspiracy in itself? Have you heard the idea of, I think it's called, what's it called? Cultural Marxism.
I didn't. I lost a few sentences.
You mentioned political correctness.
Yes.
That's been seen in some quarters as a conspiracy in itself. I think it's called cultural Marxism or multiculturalism. What do you think about? Have you come across that idea of this? That cultural Marxism is a conspiracy where they're using political correctness to shape society and shape thought.
I didn't come across this theory, but I arrived to this theory by myself. So I think that actually it is a kind of police thought, police for the thought, because this politically correctness now is setting continuous boundaries about what we are able to say and not which words we are allowed to use or not. And even though in the principle it may sound rational and right as an approach, as an effect, it's just taking us liberties away, liberties even to speak and to express ourselves. I have tried, sometimes to speak with people by using the vocabulary exactly as I want it and to pronounce words which cannot be pronounced anymore. And I always see the people getting nervous when they hear certain words. And this kind of programming, psychological programming, it's scary. It's, you see that the people, when they hear certain words, they look around to see if somebody listens, And this reminds me about all the mythology we heard about the Soviet Union of period of Stalin, where everybody was very aware what they say and what they don't say. Of course, it was worse in that situation because you end up in Siberia very easily. But we are on the same road, because if it goes in the same direction after a while, the quantity of words that we cannot say, the word concept that you cannot express, the politically uncorrectness, the political correctness will make more and more things incorrect, and we may end up in a very frightening scenario.
And it's arguable as to whether there are institutions or powerful groups directing the use or the flow of political correctness. But another point is that, I don't know about that. I think it's interesting to think about that PC or multiculturalism or cultural Marxism are being controlled at some level. I don't know, but
well, I guess they probably are, because I've noticed that media usually have trends which happen too much simultaneously. I mean, when there is a new trend to promote some new concept, and now we are not speaking about something political, but rather something cultural, you see that this is spreading across the media too fast to be a kind of a natural phenomenon. I think that actually the media really gets an input, And we know that the media, I mean, this is of course a conspiracy theory, but actually we know that the media is quite controlled in the Western world. And so if you understand that the media is under control, it doesn't make any kind of surprise, to see that certain concepts appear all in the same time all across the media, and then they promote a new way of thinking or a new concept or something like that. And so, with regarding political correctness, I think there can be a project behind.
Mm-hmm. And the actual effect which you've observed in people when you use words that have been, kind of lightly forbidden, or become very unfashionable or deemed offensive. Do you think that the groundwork is already laid in all of us, and that we are shaped by society? We are taken away from being. Well, we're civilized, aren't we? And we've been civilized for a long time. We've had religions to guide our ethics and the way we run our own psychology. So that we have had violence done to us by a conspiracy, effectively, and the conspiracy is society. So we are not free to that extent, are we?
Well, I think that as Erasmus of Rotterdam once said, the history of mankind is the history of madness. If you look back, you can see that madness has been constant in the people. I mean, people has been mad all history, but the kind of madness has continuously changed, the fashion, the form of madness. If you look back, you can't really understand how people in the past could do certain things and not realize how stupid it was. Actually, it was not only stupid, it was mad. And with the same, now what we are doing now in a lot of fields, in a lot of cases, is just mad. And so we just witness a new form of madness, or the new forms which madness assume, evolving, So now we have this political correctness with these fashions of what you can say and what you can't say. It can become worse. We have now this kind of conspiracy, how you say, this labeling of the healthy part of society, the part which actually doesn't blindly believe what is told, is labeled as conspiracy theorists. In the past, they were labeled as heretics. And the funny thing is that the same people who actually praise the heretics of the past, praise Galileo, praise the Giordano Bruno, praise these people who actually were thinking with their own head in the past, now they are not thinking in their own head and today, and they blame conspiracy theorists, to be lunatics. And the interesting thing is to see how the conspiracy theorists as a category has been growing from a very, very little percentage of the population back 15 years ago, up to maybe 20, 30, 40% of population today, or even more. So in the Western society, 15 years ago, when I wrote my book about September 11, there was very few people who would question the official narrative of the events. Now there are tens of millions. So basically now you measure them in percentages of the population, while at that time it was just single individuals. So this also gives us a clue to the fact that the future is set. In the future, the official narrative has no hope to survive. And this is valid also for a lot of other conspiracy theories, let's say. It's like we are going towards a future of, well, it's very difficult actually to predict it, but it's very difficult to go to, while on one side we have this politically correctness, madness increasing, on the other side we have also heresy phenomenon increasing, call it conspiracy or not. So we're going towards a very interesting future. I wanted to come to a conclusive sentence where I would say how it will be, but actually it's not possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to touch on the actual criticisms of conspiracy theorists. What I see time and time again repeated is they simply these critiques of conspiracy theorists. They say that they just go to the psychology of the theorist. They say things like modern life is very complex and it's comforting to find simple explanations and believe that all the chaos of modern life is actually under control. And then you've also got the other criticism. They say, people who feel disempowered by modern society, they blame, it's comforting again to blame bigger forces for your lack of success. And then the other point that I see time and again is conspiracy theorists get to feel special by having the inside view of what's really going on. So, the very sort of condescending criticism of these little people who make themselves feel bigger by their irrational cycle. Well, it's rational in the sense of it makes sense to them, to their psychology and their self-view, but these people, they're irrational. They cannot, critically think and put things together. And they have the audacity and the arrogance to question, their betters, the great journalists and politicians and TV presenters that present reality to them, which is just, it's maddening, isn't it? Really, that's the criticism, continually leveled at the conspiracy theorist.
Well, that's very interesting because paradoxically, some of these arguments are true. But the fact that they are true doesn't invalidate the fact that conspiracy theories may be right. So it is true. I don't remember now the list of the very good arguments that you mentioned. Very good from many point of views. They are. Maybe I'm not expressing myself properly.
Well, there's the old saying, isn't there? I think what you've just said then is the old saying is just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, let's say that I know there is something which is definitely wrong on the part of conspiracy theorists. This is a phenomenon I noticed already when I started to write my book, that actually it is true that things are very complex, this is true, and they are more complex than conspiracy theorists usually think. This doesn't mean that they are not true. They're simply more complex. And the fact is that people usually believe, authorities believe the mainstream, but also the conspiracy theorists in the past believed that. The point is that when to become a conspiracy theorist, let's say like that, implies a paradigm shift where actually you simply understand that you are lied to, that the official narrative of events is flawed and it's intentionally flawed, and that reality can be completely different from what you are told. But once you make this step and you change this paradigm, the problem of most of people, and in this case, yes, they don't see how complex it is, that they just revert the system of beliefs. So that basically they revert their faith. So before they believed that everything is true, now they believe that everything is false. So basically you have a black and white situation. You believe that everything is true, and then you believe that everything is wrong, while actually reality is much more complex. This is true. This kind of tendency of the people to see the things in blacks and whites, so in a pure dualistic manner, leads the people who actually do these conspiracies, let's say, if you call it like that. The strategists, the black sociologists who actually plan this kind of scenarios, to spread also false conspiracy theories throughout the internet, and so we have completely ridiculous conspiracy theories which go along together with a more serious and coherent ones. And so you have people who actually question the story of 9/11, correctly question it, believe, in reptilians, creature coming from nowhere, mixing their blood together with the elite of the world, which is a completely nonsense, of course. And but this is not, this is not something spontaneous which has been happening. This kind of false conspiracy theories has been planted in order just to make all conspiracy theories look ridiculous. And there are a lot of clues on the fact that they have been planted. I mean, if you study the matter, but beyond that, it's very logical, because if you want to make a truth incredible, you have just to poison it with some idiotic false truth. So if you mix all together, the problem is that a lot of, let's say, conspiracy theories, they just end up believing everything. So whatever you would tell them, you will tell them there are creatures on Venus and they come here and now they want to steal your money. They would probably believe it, and this is one of the problems. So not all of these claims that you mentioned are wrong. There are some. And about the claim that conspiracy theorists want to feel superior to the people who actually believe the mainstream. Well, I noticed myself that a lot of people who actually defend the mainstream media with these arguments, they look at you with a kind of sardonic smile of the person who feels superior to these conspiracy nuts, So in this case, I would say that this claim is a typical case of psychological projection. So they have this kind of pleasure, to feel intellectually superior to all these people who believe these funny stories, and then they project this sensation to actually the other category.
Yeah. So it's what we're getting is a whole sea of disinformation, isn't it? And then one of the other things that gets repeated when conspiracy theory is being criticized is as soon as if you look online at discussions, as soon as somebody starts to go behind the news and speak in a conspiracy theory fashion, you'll get some wise guy suddenly conflating what you're saying with and it's the reptiles and it's Elvis and the moon's fake. Immediately everything this is supposed to be a witty put down, but it's regurgitated in every criticism of conspiracy theory that I see. So it's because of this, it's very easy to smear all conspiracy theorists with the same brush, isn't it?
Yes, it happened even to me. I remember the first time I've ever been interviewed about 9/11 book, and it was more than 10 years ago. There was a radio who actually invited, and suddenly they started to ask me about reptilians. And, I didn't even know that David Icke wrote a book about that. And so I started to say, oh, sorry, I'm not very, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he explained me the theory of the reptilians. And I didn't want to offend the guy. And so I said, well, if you intend it as a metaphor, maybe, but as a metaphor, you cannot really say this kind of thing seriously, but actually, this was serious. Of course, if you speak about science and you speak, how could the two towers be demolished in 10, 12 seconds? And then someone, so you believe in reptilians. You understand that actually it becomes very difficult to make a rational conversation. And the audience will just say, oh, look at this idiot is believing in reptilians and he doesn't even want to admit it. So you understand that in such a situation.
I think the addition of the reptiles theory to conspiracy theory was probably a brilliant move by whoever is polluting the field with disinformation.
Absolutely, and actually this theory emerged exactly in the period where actually the 9/11 narrative was set up. So it's not a coincidence.
Yeah. I mean, I was just reading an article on Bloomberg before about everything being a conspiracy. It was a critical article and looking at, why people believe conspiracies. And it quoted I think it's some research or at least some, pop psychology, that those who believe the moon landings were faked are more likely to believe 9/11 was an inside job. And therefore, this shows a psychological tendency. Whereas, while there may be psychological tendencies at work, at least in that statement, I would say those that believe those two things, there is a common factor, which is that potentially people have a suspicion of power, and specifically the power of American elites. So there's a rational reason beyond, mere psychological tendency. The rational reason being just a natural suspicion of power and a suspicion of American power.
Well, yeah. Often it happens that it's the relation with authority. People act differently as regards which is their relation with authority. So, yeah, in this sense, it's true. But if you go into specific, though, well, also with the moon landing, we could have some arguments, but it has never been rationally discussed. We now take labels. Big packages. So September 11, yes, no. Moon landing, yes, no. And actually, we should go into the issue and have rational discussions. But actually, we have only people who defend positions with fake arguments on both sides. So a lot of debunking of conspiracy theories are based on debunking false arguments. So in Italy we have a way to say that the exception is what confirms a rule. I don't know if this applies also in English.
Yeah.
And
yes, it does,
and the debunking, of conspiracy theories often is based on the exception which invalidates a rule. So if you have 10 cases for a conspiracy theory to exist, and one is false, then one is flawed, is a mistake, then you go towards to that one. So and so there is no rational discussion basically on the issues.
So maybe we should move on to looking at actual evidence abroad in the world, or looking at models of power and how things operate. Actually, one last psychological element before that I wanted to ask you. It occurred to me the other day that perhaps it's actually rational to be quite paranoid of big, powerful institutions, and that, while we've lived in civilizations that have had them for thousands of years. Before that we lived in, more primitive tribal situations where I guess we would be paranoid of, natural forces beyond our power. Whereas now we are paranoid, or some of us are paranoid of human forces beyond our power. And yet the ideology and the propaganda of these institutions says, trust, we're doing it for your benefit, and if you can't trust, there is something a little bit wrong with your psychology. So I would actually, I know we've already covered this, and we're both on the side of paranoia or critical responses to this reality being given to us by institutions. But just in those terms I've outlined, doesn't it completely follow that we should be critical as the individuals that we are now?
Yes, that's an interesting point. Actually, yeah, we should be critical. But actually, I must confess that after having seen how irrational, how stupid, actually, how uncritical, how absurdly people actually are inclined to think, I am paradoxically tempted to think that the people who are in power, who actually set up this kind of smoke screens may not completely wrong. Well, they say, trust us. We do the right thing, and you have to trust us. The meta language is you don't deserve to know the truth because you cannot stand it, and we are just doing it. The funny thing is that the people are really actually stupid enough so that these powers they may be right. You get the point. The question is if these people then are really what they think they are. I mean, if they're really doing the right things, which actually we could seriously doubt. But you have a problem, who is more stupid in this sense? I mean, who is because we, the people, are stupid enough. I mean, I'm having this evidence by now, So I don't really think that big quantities of people can act and rationally, can think rationally. The evidence proves otherwise continuously. So maybe it is really impossible to tell the truth to the people, So in this case, they may be right. Of course, it doesn't mean that the choices that they make are right. That's another. Maybe they are also quite stupid after all.
Do you think we could say? Do you think that we could say that? I mentioned before about primitive pre-civilization tribal society, and now we have civilization and culture. Do you think with the advent of civilization and culture, most human beings could be said to have become domesticated, and then you get the term used by conspiracy believers for the masses, which is sheeple. Do you think does that all fit together? Do you think is that fair?
Well, I think that we are not so far from the primitive societies, and we are sheeples, and we have been sheeples already in the caves. I think that actually the mental structure of human beings didn't change very much in thousands of years. Let's say in at least 2,000 of years, let's say like that. And we still have actually the traces of our let's say bicameral period, as the theory of Julian James is concerned about the origin of consciousness.
We talked about that in my last podcast, actually, the Julian James book.
Oh, really? This is one of the most important books in my personal view in the history of mankind. I mean, it is. I think it's a more important book than the Darwin book because it really tracks back on the origin of consciousness and especially on not only origin of consciousness but actually how our own mind is structured. Based on the foundings of the previous bicameral mind, and actually, well, now of course, if we just say a few words, they won't mean much for the people who listen to us. But the point is that the whole concept of authority is embedded in this previous way of our mind to be organized thousands of years ago. And this organization of the mind still have an inertia and still is affecting us. And this is what actually make us to sheeple, who actually would just follow the authority. Because in the past, this was, we are speaking about more than 2,000 years ago. This, maybe 3,000 years ago or more. This was actually, it would go without question, obedience to authority would be completely blind. And now it is not completely blind, but still we have this strong pulsion. And it's a big argument in itself, but that would need hours, to properly develop. But actually, I think that to this concern, our brain is the same of a few thousand years ago. We didn't make any step further.
Mm-hmm. And yet, as you say, we are a little bit further down the road, aren't we? We are a little bit more critical of authority. Hence the need, do you think, would you say the media is controlled? Is the media a conspiracy in the West? To what extent is that occurring, do you think?
I think that if we are a little bit advanced, is because of the internet. I think that the internet has created a very interesting creative resonance phenomenon, so that actually information could spread between all the cells of human society which has access to it, and the people suitable to connect the dots, to understand things. They just exchange information and created collective investigation on certain subjects. And this is the real difference. Without the internet, I think we would be still stuck in a kind of blind acceptance of our authority lies. But probably because of this awakening of a lot of people, also the powers in be, they have increased their skills in lying to the public and to build manufacture myths that they would give to the people to believe. And so it's just like the whole battle between authority and sheeple or critical thinking people has grown to a new level.
Yeah. But the more skeptical elements of society, will say, but why do they want to control? Why do they want to manipulate media or manipulate politics if they do? Aren't they just, normal people like us with families? They're just decent people. What would you say to that? What to me sounds like a very naive question, but what would you say to that question?
Well, actually, we have just to watch to what these people say, quite officially, actually. If we go to the newcons, the American newcons, who actually have shaped much of the foreign policy of the USA in the past 15 years, they explicitly say that they follow the teaching of American philosopher Leo Strauss, who lived maybe 80 years ago, something like that, and some actually of the leading figures of the neocon movement in the USA, like Wolfowitz, are actually direct disciples. I mean, they were.
Yeah. Didn't he teach the noble lie that it was
exactly
go back to ancient Greece? Yeah.
Exactly.
You should lie to the people for higher ends, for moral ends. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a Neoplatonic philosophy, and actually, not only you should lie, but you must lie, in the sense that actually, even it's a matter of by principle. You should never tell anything true. This is actually a philosophy, and these politicians have stated that they are actually following the teaching of these philosophers. So this tell a lot. It's they are following a doctrine. They're following a method in this. And on the other side, you can also see that there is some logic. I mean, it's not stupid. After that, we mentioned how actually masses can be stupid and people can be stupid. It should not surprise that somebody comes to this conclusion, and you cannot even rule out that they are wrong. What you could question, if these people you ask, are the people normal people with wives and so, yes. And this is the problem, that the fact that they have this power doesn't mean that they are so much smarter than the others. So you can question the quality of their analysis and their judgment and their decisions. Because that's another problem. In theory, this is logic, but in the practice, who guarantees that these people, just because they achieved, they were in the right moment, in the right places, and they made the right careers, and they who guarantees that these people are really the best one to decide what should be done?
Yeah, yeah. So if they are employing the method of the noble lie, to what end do you think that they? Let's say the American political establishment or the neocons. What is this a paternalistic conspiracy of theirs?
Paternalistic is an understatement. I think that in a way, yes, but on the other side, I think that after a while, your own method becomes your own myth. So you start to believe to be superhuman. This is the problem. So it's because of the limits of because of your human limits. Once you are in those positions, you start to think that all what you do is right by definition. This is basically the same mistake that all dictators everywhere do. Every time in the world a new dictator appears, usually the first years of his dictatorship are for the best. I mean, usually the country works better and the people are happier usually from the results. The problem is that every dictator after a while starts to suffer from the bias that whatever he does is the best thing by definition, because he's only surrounded by yes people who actually reinforce all his beliefs. And so without a real feedback with reality, they just end up, in delirious situations. So this is the real problem of dictatorship, the fact that even if you have the best person at some point taking the power, the best person will not remain the best person forever. After a while, he will start, to lose track of reality, but he has the power. And in this case, we don't have one dictator. We have a system which is a dictator who actually thinks that paternalistically, like a dictator, like a king, they think that they know better. And maybe in the beginning they did, but at some point, it can get out of control even for them, and actually they may end up just like any other dictators, spinning out of control into madness.
So the issue is the systems themselves. Do you think that they can be reformed?
This is a very good question. I can spot the problem, I can sense the problem, I can see the problem. This doesn't mean that I see the solution. I have actually no idea, and I think nobody can see a solution, because every kind of government doesn't work. I mean, it has its own flaw. As Churchill once said, democracy is a horrible system, but the others are worse. Well, I don't know if the others are worse, but actually, democracy is terrible. Every system of government is terrible. And I have absolutely no idea which could be the best solution. Now, actually, this is the kind of current political wave, is this one neocon-based, like a kind of semi-democracy, is a kind of compromise democracy is the best solution. So it's a kind of pseudo-democracy in which people decide about little things, like should we have gay marriage or straight marriage, this kind of little social things, but not on the big issues. So you have a mild democracy model now, like let the people believe, choose about the little things, and we deal about the big things. But the point is that this we, as we see, does mean that they know better. So after a while, you can just watch now the disasters of the Western policies, both internal as external policies, to see that these people are not necessarily the smartest people around.
So what was it that brought you to write your book on September 11th?
Well, it was in those days, it was the fact that you could not discuss it with anyone. This was the reason why I wrote the book, because I discovered that the official narrative didn't make any sense. It was completely unbelievable, and it was not a sudden process, because you discovered these things in layers, time after time. And I needed people to discuss it with, but there were none available. Everybody would be stuck in the mainstream narrative, and every time that you would doubt it, put it up, people would just look at you like you're completely nuts. So in this case, I said, okay, well, I know what I'm saying, so actually I will write a book. So I started to write down what I understood. It was not a plan to write a book. It was a plan just to write down what I understand, so that I cannot forget it, because I could not discuss it with anyone. And actually, even more than that, I noticed on myself the process of the process of my mind having a bias, because I understood certain things about 9/11. I discussed it with people. I saw I could not discuss it. I forgot about that. And after 3 months, I realized I stopped to believe the things that I understood. So this was a kind of frustrating moment, because I had understood that the narrative was false. But then facing rejection from everybody, and actually I was not interested in writing a book. I was just discussing. I noticed that my mind started to become mainstream again. I mean, I started to believe again the official narrative. And this fact that my mind was betraying me, actually this is what happens to everybody, but differently from others, I noticed the process, and I didn't accept it. So I saw it in myself. I saw in myself, my mind, changing its beliefs because of more tranquilizing. It's more. You feel better if you don't question these things, and I didn't accept it, so I started to go back. And actually, this is a fact that had been written also in the famous book by Gustave Le Bon about the psychology of the masses, where actually he stated that if you convince a person about something on the rational basis, on the next day, the same person probably will be back to his own older beliefs, It doesn't matter if this is irrational, because his older beliefs are something that he feels, and nothing that he understands can change what he feels. And actually, this is what was happening to me. So basically, I was feeling safer inside the mainstream narrative, even though, because slowly I forgot all the details that led me to this new vision of the things. And so I went back to my previous feelings. This kind of betrayal of my mind was unacceptable. So I went back. I studied again the issue. I really understood for the second time these things. And this time, since I could not discuss it with anyone, I decided to write the book, to write it down. And then it became a very big book, actually 600 pages. But this was, I said, I will write this book and then completely forget about the issue. Maybe I go back to my mainstream vision. And if I need to know the truth, I will have my own book to read. Of course, in the process of writing the books, you understand so many things that it makes a critical mess, and then there is no way back. Actually, at this point, I cannot believe the mainstream anymore.
Yeah. There's an interesting piece of legislation in America. I don't know if you're aware of it, called the National Defense Authorization Act for 2013, and it apparently the State Department it enacted that the State Department and the Pentagon can go beyond manipulating mainstream media, putting pressure on and so on. They can actually directly disseminate campaigns of misinformation now to the US public. So this is on the record. This is actually authorized in an act, the National Defense Authorization Act for 2013. And Naomi Wolf has said, the political scientist, ex-advisor to Clinton and Al Gore, I think, she said, after this act, it's no longer crazy to question the media. It's crazy not to.
That's very well put. Very well put. But here we we go to the bias that people have, where reality doesn't matter anymore. So this is a real fact, but mainstream thinking people would simply dismiss it. It doesn't make any difference. It's simply not, and it doesn't fit their mindset, and so the confirmation bias of their mind will just simply don't register this information. This information will make no impact whatsoever, and this makes them becoming crazy. So actually, Naomi Wolf is absolutely right. It's absolutely crazy not to question the media. After that, there is a law that allows the government to falsify the media. So the information about the media. I mean, this is what it's mad. It's really crazy.
It's a little bit like there's people watching the media like it's a movie or it's a TV show, and you're sitting there giving them spoilers and saying it's not real, and they're like acting like, don't spoil the show for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's
I'm trying to enjoy this. Shut up. It's real.
Yes, this is why I say that we did make so many progress from the mental point of view from the time of the caves, because all this is completely unbelievable. Actually, now this what I'm trying to understand is how society, how the mind of people is working. This is far more interesting than every conspiracy theory, because we are now going to the root of the problem, the perception of reality in human beings, which is far weirder and far unbelievable than I thought. By the way, connecting to what you mentioned, I have to add that there is another law, but I cannot tell you now when it was done and exactly, which actually allows the government to operate what they call cognitive infiltration. This means to infiltrate among conspiracy theorists in order to direct their views. So direct and change their views. So on the internet, when you have all these discussions about conspiracy and stuff, now you have operatives, governmental operatives, U.S. governmental operatives, who actually are there and they're expressing opinions, and they are cognitively infiltrated, and we don't know actually which kind of myths they're spreading, but this could refer to what we were discussing before. Maybe they're just spreading false conspiracy theories, or we don't know what they do. But actually, this is clearly meant to disrupt the coherency of the discussions of the people who actually have gone over the Rubicon, of the conspiracy mindset.
So that's an established policy. That's actually on the record that these government operatives are out there. That's like out in the open, is it?
Yes. So on one side, they falsify the information for the media. This is on the record. And on the other side, they infiltrate the conspiracy theories to spread something which probably shouldn't be spread, something wrong, I don't know. So it's on the record. And at the same time, they project this on Russia and they say Russia is doing it. So now we have a gigantic case of psychological projection in which you say, but this is what Russia does, I don't know if Russia does it or not, but this is not the point. It should be relevant for the Western public what Russia is doing. What is relevant for the Western public is what the Western governments are doing. This is the real point. It's about shifting the blame to another country so that the people become paranoid about somebody else instead of their own government.
Yeah. Well, that's always been the model, hasn't it? Is to I think Mencken said they menace the government with the government menaces the populace with continual hobgoblins to keep them clamorous to be led to safety.
Yes, this is a very old scheme, and this is a very simple, actually, operation compared to others,
Yeah. So, therefore, okay, let's make some conclusions. There's no point in voting then, would you say? And the American election currently, seemingly, I feel in the media that I see and the culture that Trump is a bad guy. He's like Hitler, etc., etc. But I've read in a piece you posted on your Facebook feed by John Pilger, journalist John Pilger. Pilger says the CIA has demanded Trump is not elected. Pentagon generals have demanded he is not elected. The pro-war New York Times demands that he is not elected. So I just wonder, is he worth voting for in that case? Is Brexit worth voting for? Is voting ever worth it?
Yeah. Well, these are three good questions. Personally, I don't think that voting for elections has any sense in the Western world. When there was the election, or the first election of Obama, everybody was so enthusiastic about Obama. And I just saw the theater. And for me, the theater was very clear. So I could never get any kind of passion in that. Luckily, I didn't have to choose whether to vote or not, since I'm not American. But if I had to vote, I would probably avoid it, because I just saw the theater, and actually the facts turned out that it was just only theater. As it regards to foreign policy, he didn't. He got a Nobel Prize before he actually did anything, and later he destroyed 3 or 4 countries. Libya was destroyed, Syria was destroyed, even though they claim that they are not responsible. And he doubled the troops to Afghanistan. So basically, and this is a Nobel Prize for peace. It's completely ridiculous. I mean, this is the values of the West, which completely crumbles, because not only you do exactly the same things that Bush has done, actually you get a Nobel Prize for that. Actually, in my 9/11 book, I wrote a kind of paradoxical, futuristic piece in which I was foreseeing that one day George Bush would get eventually even the Nobel Prize for what he did, Nobel Prize for Peace. And Obama got it. So actually, I wanted to be paradoxical, and I ended up being real, This is, so now with the Clinton-Trump controversy, I just see another theater, but I'm not the screenwriter of this piece, so I've no idea what actually is the planned outcome. I still think that the outcome is quite planned. I don't believe that what's happening is completely spontaneous as it looked like, Even Obama, everybody was saying, no, he should not be elected, no, he should be elected. But this was made unpopular, So now you have all these agencies, CIA, everybody saying, no, Trump should not be elected. And I have no idea if this is real or not. The point is, I don't say that this is not real. I say that I cannot know if this is real or not. So when it happened with Obama, I was not completely sure. There was a margin of doubt. I say, it looks like a theater. I don't know if this is real or not. It turned out it was not real. And now it looks like real, but maybe they have only improved the screenplay. So we really don't know which is the show. That if this is a show, there is some margin of truth. We don't know. This is the truth.
No. It's like the system keeps reinventing itself and freshening itself. Yeah.
Exactly. Every time, if you make, it's like, this is just like a Hollywood production. Every time you just create a new script, and the people follow the story and they believe it is real. But actually what's going on now in this election is, it looks like in a film. I mean, it's very difficult to believe this is completely unscripted, Also, the primaries, the battle between Bernie Sanders and Clinton, and now, I mean, everything looks like a Hollywood movie. It could be just by coincidence. I don't want to be, the conspiracy nut and say that everything is scripted, but I cannot rule it out. This is the real problem. I cannot rule it out.
If it is scripted, obviously they want to control both candidates, and even if someone gets in who they don't want, there's likely a massive political apparatus around them that creates such inertia that a single individual cannot make much of a difference anyway. And this is the idea of the deep government analysis, or shadow government. So what do you think about that? That even say if they don't control both candidates. No, that wasn't the question I want. Maybe I'll go on to that in a minute. But also, I wanted to say, what would be the purpose of all this theatre? Is it just a focus for the energy of the people to go somewhere and let like a a reducing valve or what do you call it? A pressure valve, a pressure release for the public. What would be the purpose of such massive amounts of political theatre?
Well, you have to keep the myth in the world. You make it alive, and you have to keep the myth of democracy alive. This is the important thing. And even when you see in the Hollywood movies, the Hollywood movies are full of stories where actually all the horrible things of the American politics is depicted and exposed and criticized and condemned. But one element is constant in all the films is the power of the press and the honesty of the press. So it doesn't matter how evil the politicians are. It doesn't matter how corrupted and murderous they are. You will always find some courageous journalist who finally will end up writing one article, and this one article will save the world.
Yeah,
actually,
like
what this article
the end of. Sorry, go on. I was just going to say it's like the end of All the President's Men, isn't it? When the
Yes.
newspaper vans are taken to the street.
Yes. And this happens again and again. In many films, it's always, now it has become a stereotype. You have just get out with this article and everything will be solved. Well, this is a myth. It has nothing to do with the reality. And actually, I found only one exception, and this was very, very brilliant to this stereotype. And this was in the first season of Daredevil by Netflix, which I watched because I was as a kid I was a fan of superheroes, and at some point it was a quite well scripted series, and towards the end of the series you have finally the same stereotype, the journalist who will finally write the article. Actually, you have a variation. He's kicked out from his newspaper because he wanted to write the truth, and so he will start to write a blog. But the kind of rhetoric was the same, and I was laughing at that and saying, "This is completely ridiculous," because actually nobody will change anything with a blog. So I mean, now they're becoming ridiculous. But then I got a surprise, and I have to admit that the screenplays has been very brilliant, because at some point the evil guy is meeting this heroic journalist who will start his own blog to reveal the truth. And as the journalists say, "You will not stop me to write this article." And the evil guy say, "I have no intention to stop you. You can write what you want in your blog." Because the people now, they just only interested in cats on Facebook. So it doesn't matter what you write. The people are watching videos of cats on Facebook, So this was the reality. For a moment, there was a sparkle of reality inside this myth.
I had a flash of intuition, I think, about along similar lines. About at the end of the 90s, I wrote a science fiction story, and while I was writing it, it was a lot about the manipulation and sort of reality creation from governments. And as I was writing it, I just had this real flash. It wasn't like an intellectual thing. It just like came from nowhere. And I was reading conspiracy stuff back then in the 90s, and as you said earlier, there were less of us back in the 90s. And this kind of information was just fascinating to me, and I just felt like this stuff's got to get out to the world, and I believed that it would change the world. And I just had this flash of intuition that in the future everyone will know about conspiracies and it won't matter. And that's exactly where we are now, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. This was a big surprise for me too. I must confess, I was quite naive when I started writing my 9/11 book 13 years ago. And I was also paranoid, because I say there are two cases. Either my book won't matter, or I will get killed, because that was very nervous actually, but luckily it didn't matter.
It's a much worse fate to be ignored, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it was very difficult. Well, there were some authors who were not ignored. There was Hunter J. Thompson, a famous American gonzo journalist. Actually, he was writing a book just like mine in 2003, 2004, and actually he got killed. I mean, he suicided in 2 different ways. And by saying in 2 different ways, it means that on the first day, some reports on his death appeared. On the second day, these reports were already different, So, and basically he even told some friends that actually he would eventually be killed because of the book he was writing. This is a big difference because he was writing a book about September 11, and apparently, I mean, from what I found on the internet, it could be also planted. You don't know what you find. I mean, I didn't know Thompson personally, so I have no direct link to this information. But it looks like he was writing a book about that, and the difference between Hunter J. Thompson and anybody else is that if he would write it in those days, and in those days, it was quite near to the event itself. This would have made a difference. And if you make a difference, then, then you are really in danger. And now you can write what you want, because actually, this is the very interesting thing about the paradox, that by writing my book and everybody writing about this issue and people making films about that, what do? They reinforce the myth of democracy, of freedom of speech. The point is that, yes, this does not actually endanger the powers, because it just reinforces the myth that we can say what we want. The little detail is because this doesn't matter. So it's very interesting, this situation.
So as a guide to any future writers who would like a career in this area and not to be killed, what issues do you think they should stay away from or not uncover completely? What, these powerful people that will remove writers or journalists, which do you think are the issues that they do want control over, and that they have their aims and they want to achieve their aims and they don't want them threatened by us little people? So, well, for example, with Hunter S. Thompson, he was potentially going to cast into doubt the story of 9/11, and with it, that was a reason to then go to war in the Middle East, wasn't it?
Yes, the point is that Hunter J. Thompson was not somebody you could ignore. So he would have had a social impact. The social mood would have changed. So he was a real threat. If you are a famous journalist, if you are a famous writer, if you are Noam Chomsky, if you are this kind of people, you simply cannot do something like that, because you would make an impact, and this will be not tolerated.
Yeah. Well, Chomsky has actually said that it's a waste of time to question the official story of 9/11.
Well, he was trying not to be completely unhonest, In a way, he's paradoxically right. It is a waste of time. I wasted a lot of time on that. I mean, what did I obtain, Nothing. Nobody obtained anything. So basically, what I obtained is understanding, because by going through this process, I understood a lot of things. But Chomsky is basically right. It is a waste of time, but for the wrong reasons. It's not a waste of time because it's not true. It's a waste of time because the point is that, being Chomsky, he simply cannot speak about this issue unless he doesn't want to have a little accident like Hunter J. Thompson. And if you are very important, you simply can't.
Right, but okay. So if you are important, what are the issues that? I mean, I'd like to know what you think about who are the they. Who are we talking about? Who are the powerful ones? And what is it that they want to achieve by these machinations? What should, Hunter S. Thompson stepped on their toes regarding going to war in the Middle East, apparently. So which are the areas in which we should avoid? And by that, I'm actually asking, so to an extent, you can allow society to freely govern itself, freely run, but I would imagine, in my analysis, that there are certain areas that they want to have control over. So what do you think those areas are, and who are these powerful groups?
Well, who these powerful groups are is quite difficult to define because we live in a kind of cryptocracy. So basically, this is it's not a democracy, maybe it's an oligarchy, but the real point is a cryptocracy. You don't know who they are because they are clever enough to disguise themselves. Because if you are this guy, I mean, if you look at the history of the world, everybody who has had the power at some point has lost his head, was executed. The more powerful they were, the more tragic was their fall when finally the power finished. So these people, eventually, they are not stupid, and they decided, well, we want the power. Why should we actually risk, our heads? So they are probably well hidden, and since every kind of you can have a government changing, presidents changing, but this powers continues to exist, so they are just in disguise, and so who they are, and about what you can write and you cannot write, the point is what you know and what you don't know, because probably there are simply too many things that we completely ignore. And of course, you cannot write something about things that you ignore. What you know, it came out from somewhere. Either it has been leaked, or somebody must have mentioned it from inside. Okay, the only people who actually risk something, people who eventually leak it. So people who have access to the original information. These people, of course, have a big risk, but we let's say on the people, we the people, let's say, we can only repeat information which comes out. We cannot invent information. We cannot. We have no access to secret information. Even my 9/11 book, I don't have. A lot of people say, "How did you write this book? Did you go to New York? Did you?" So I don't need to go to New York to write this book. Actually, information is all mainstream information which has appeared and then disappeared from the media. So the media is releasing enough information by mistake, usually, so that you can create yourself a picture of reality which is not mainstream. It's what I call the law of the first 24 hours. So basically, immediately after an event, honest journalists, they just report what they see. And because not all the journalists are corrupted and not all the journalists are controlled. This is not true. But you have, at the top of the pyramids of every media, you have the people who are controlled and who actually keep a control about what is published. And if something very inconvenient appears on the news or in the newspaper, this will simply not appear again. This is the method. So if you go back in the archives, which are all available on the internet, and you look for the information which has been reported in the 24 hours after an important event, you probably find all the truth that you need. And if this information will disappear later and substituted with something, say something different, you have another clue that this was something relevant and that the subsequent information is a lie. So this is a method, and it works, and it allowed me, for example, for me to retell the story of the 9/11 events. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, so just break off whenever you feel. But that makes me think about what are now called false flag events by the conspiracy community, so to speak. And I think it's these events that have really tried the patience of more conventionally minded or people that tend to believe the mainstream a bit more. So you've had the Sandy Hook shooting, Boston bombing, London 7/7 bombing, and so on. It all sort of builds on top of the 9/11, which is like the foundation. Orlando shooting in the gay nightclub. So you've got now people immediately after these events. You've got people analysing it, like you say, like in the first 24 hours, and digging through it, and very, very quickly, releasing videos saying this is a false flag. And because of Facebook, your average person is now seeing these analyses and they just tend to sort of, they're naturally reacting to it as if it's a reality, and they see it as an absolutely crass response to cry conspiracy. So what's your feeling on this proliferation of false flags now? Is it worth questioning these? Well, obviously that's a silly question. We should question it, but any thoughts on all these false flag stuff? And I think one of the narratives amongst the conspiracy people is that in America, the argument is the establishment want to take away the guns, so you've got shootings happening a lot more. Have you got any opinions on these so-called false flags?
Well, this is quite likely. And on the other side, it's quite likely that the purpose is to take away the guns because, when now you have a very interesting situation in the USA where you have a system which is apparently democratic, but in the practice is not so much, and you have probably very, very big economical crisis ahead. At some point, the dollar may just collapse, and you could have very hard situation in the US, and you don't want maybe to have a few hundred of million of people with automatic weapons, having to discuss. So I don't know if they will manage to take away the weapons, but I would imagine that they would try to find a way to take them away. As for these false flags, you have some of them which are clearly false flags, but on the other side, there are some of the events which actually seems to be staged and to have not even taken place at all. I know that this may sound completely weird and bizarre to most readers, but if you investigate some cases like Sandy Hook, they become laughable. I'm sorry, I don't want to offend anyone, by that, but I'm not saying, the events themselves has so many incredible features, that you have to question if they actually happened at all, and, there are pictures of the supposedly deceased victims which actually pop up, later, when it looks like they never died. You see the pictures, so in this case, there are some strange things going on. This deserves more a documentary with images, because you are fed with images, so you just analyze the images and you start to say these images don't convince me. These people seems to me actors, and they don't seem real family victims. And if you don't see the image, you can just say this person has no respect, for the victims and stuff. Well, you just say check it yourself, go and see, and then see if something is fishy there or not. So there are a lot of these cases, and for example, there are some cases. For example, the Bataclan massacre in France some time ago. This was a terrible event which has actually changed the laws in France, because in France some laws, emergency laws, has been made. They wanted even to make a Patriot Act. Well, there has been discussion, let's say, for a kind of European Patriot Act. Luckily, it didn't happen yet. But one of the very upsetting things about this issue is that there are no images. Now, we live in a period where everybody has a telephone, a mobile phone, and it doesn't matter what happens, where it happens, there is always a lot of people who take pictures, because basically everybody can take pictures. Now you have a concert where, have you ever been to a rock concert? If you go to a rock concert, you see that virtually everybody is not watching at the concert anymore. They are filming it. They're watching at the concert, looking through the telephone, which is suspended over their heads, and while they are filming. So if you have hundreds of people who are actually filming, you should have hundreds of videos of the shooting happening. There is only one. Now, only one is not credible. There should be hundreds, of these videos. And as well, there should be hundreds of pictures of the victims, because 150 people or so has been killed on the day allegedly, but you don't see one picture. You don't see one picture when everybody has a camera and everybody is making selfies everywhere and photographing everything. Oh no, there is one picture, only one. And in this picture, you don't see 150 people. You see maybe 15, 20. So one only picture, you understand, this is kind of fishy. You need a lot of faith to believe that the things happen like you're told that they happen. If everything else is incoherent, because you have too many exceptions. You have the exception that no picture is made, no video is made, and most of the people who die don't have a Facebook account anymore. At least half of the people don't have a Facebook account. Of course, in the single case, this has no value. There are a lot of people without a Facebook account. But try to find somebody in their 20s without Facebook accounts. I mean, you can find 1, 2, 3, but you cannot find 50% of the people without a Facebook account. This is unreal, Try to find 50% of your friends without a Facebook account. It's not real. Yeah. So a lot of things are fishy in these stories.
Yeah. So maybe a completely engineered fake event.
Yeah, sometimes you can have a blend, you can have a partially engineered event, you can have a little event with maybe some victims which are real, but the majority of victims are fictional. And if you have more victims, of course, the event is more shocking in the eyes of the public. So if it is a false flag and the purpose is to scare people, the best thing is to have as little quantity of victims as possible, but with the biggest impact, so that the people believe that the victims were many more. So it would make a rational out of that. And the paradoxical thing is that the less victims you are, we have the perception that the more they cheat us, the worse it is. But practically speaking, it means that they kill less people. Maybe they don't kill anyone. Now, if they kill no one, actually they are almost innocent in a way. If it is just only theater, we should even praise them, say, look how good they are. They make an event which is actually costing no life, no price of life. Some people, it looks like they would prefer it to be a normal false flag with real victims, but the real point is that people hate the idea to be cheated. So what makes them angry is the fact that they can be so stupid as to be cheated to that extent. Well, I'm sorry, you have to accept that. You can't be that stupid. We can be that stupid, because at some point we all have been believing these things until, through the pain of understanding that we were wrong, we started to understand that actually the things were looking different.